Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Essential NFL Podcast. I'm Stephen Clinton, your resident host slash film junkie slash data scientist, and yeah, running through the Week 9 slate for the NFL. So yeah, let's get into it. It's Thursday, so got Baltimore and Miami to open things up. So yeah, right now the line on this game, Baltimore is favored by 7.5 points on the road. With a total of 51.5 against the Miami Dolphins. So yeah, I think there's a few different talking points here. Obviously, let's go with the Ravens, who get Lamar Jackson back on the field, and start with their offense. Obviously, I think that Baltimore's offense did some really good things last week in that victory over the Bears. Had a good plan in place for playing with Tyler Huntley, and Huntley made enough plays, which he's done on several occasions as the backup quarterback for the Ravens. So I thought that that he did a really nice job moving the offense relative to what it had been, and I think it just kind of piques your interest a little bit for what it's going to look like with Lamar back on the field here. I'm guessing that he's feeling pretty darn good at this point. He took plenty of time off, and not to say that in a derogatory tone, like he needs to get his leg right. But you hope that with the time that he's been afforded, that he'll be ready to go with that. I think the rest of the offense, you've got a lot of pieces that look really, really good right now. So no reason to think they can't take off. They're playing against a Miami Dolphins defense that, the results against the Atlanta Falcons and Kirk Cousins aside, I don't think that Miami suddenly world beaters on defense. I think that there are still problems in the secondary. Atlanta, we'll talk about them later, but they've just got their own set of issues, right? And let's I think it's always so important to you get so caught up in the week to week hype in the NFL of the results, right? But like you got to remember that Bijan Robinson fumbling and taking points off the board, well, that's going to lead to a much more extreme outcome in terms of what the points look like, especially just because the scoring system in the NFL, like just naturally as humans, you don't really think about the translation into scores on drives. And it can get so skewed when you're missing opportunities to put up 7 or 3 and get the score a lot closer in certain cases. So, I think that, Atlanta, there were certainly all sorts of problems on offense, and it was really difficult to. It seemed like Kirk Cousins hasn't practiced with those guys, and a lot of them were kind of the second teamers that and I don't know. It was confusing to see how many times, there were just flat out miscommunications from that Atlanta offense. I think there were opportunities to be had even without Drake London on the field. So all that to say, while Miami certainly has a lot of, positive pieces up front, and I think the defensive line's moving in the right direction, and Jordan Brooks are making a lot of plays, right? I do think that you can still get after that back end, and I think that Baltimore has the tools to attack any which way. So we'll see how that works out. On the flip side of it, I think it's I think this is somewhat of an Atlanta point, but partially a Miami point too. I think it was really, really interesting to me to see Miami with Mike McDaniel, who past 2 years in particular, like the at you run game in the middle of the field, punching you in the mouth, hitting runs between the tackles just has not been emphasized at all. I mean, it's like that's what they don't do when I think about it, right? They hit the outsides, they do a lot of things along those lines, but they're not an at-you run game. And to see them attack Atlanta's defense that way 1 week after that was very clearly San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan's plan for how to get after that Atlanta defense. One quotable moment was, what George Kittle said about, wanting to make Christian McCaffrey the player of the week going into that game against Atlanta. And, obviously it doesn't speak to exactly what they were doing in that game. But when you watch the film, it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it was just, we're coming at you. And this Atlanta defense, and the guys they drafted in the first round are undersized. So is Arnold Ebiketie, who was the guy in-house as an edge. And then, so that kind of leaves you with Leonard Floyd for, more of a physical presence. And then, they're just okay at those, defensive line positions, in my opinion, across the board. I don't know. David Onyemata's had some nice flashes of late, but, and then you combine that with having JD Bertrand at linebacker right now, and just, he's just getting attacked like crazy. And, I think that it's just very, and then, as I guess as a last note on that front, like Caden Ellis, who, I mentioned him as, he's one of my favorite players in the league. Just, he's such a great playmaker at the inside linebacker position. But, I would say the area I'd say he doesn't necessarily stand out to me as much as just kind of flowing as a sideline to sideline linebacker in the way that, somebody like a Zach Bond really excels at, talking, candidates to take over that first team All Pro with Fred Warner sidelined. There's a good list that we could go through, but Caden's not necessarily, that guy who's just the best run fitter in the world. Like, he is unbelievable blitzer, gets off. We've talked about the positives of Caden Ellison where he excels. But, I wouldn't say that he's necessarily that fit and diagnose guy to the same level that he does several other things. So, I think that was really telling for Atlanta in one way. And then for Miami, it's going to be interesting to see now that they did that, whether or not they try to continue doing that against this Baltimore team. I think that Baltimore's improved in several regards on defense. It seems to be every few years theme with Baltimore, if not every year, that they just steadily figure things out throughout the season and find ways to get better on defense. And I think that having it felt like a lot more emphasis on Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins on the outside in that game against Chicago. Just kind of tapping into those guys as the key corners. On and playing Humphrey on the outside, I guess a little bit more was just general impressions I had. I didn't chart any of this or anything like that, but I also thought Roquan Smith played one of his better games of the season. We'll see if he sustains that, but I guess that. Watching that back, I just felt like, Baltimore's moving in the right direction. So it'll be interesting because, if Miami can continue to get something out of that, running at you, maybe incorporating the extra backs, Ollie Gordon and Jalen Wright, as they did against Atlanta. I think that those are good ideas given, that they don't have as deep cast of pass catchers as they're normally used to. Jalen Waddle, I think, can definitely, get loose on either one of these corners from Baltimore and make some big plays at some point here. But, there's just, only so many guys to spread around to. And I think that in a lot of ways, that at you run game has been what's been missing from this offense to a significant degree. Now, we'll see how this works against a Baltimore defense if they do try to do that rather than working on an Atlanta defense where it sure seems like the feeling around the league is that that's the way to go at that specific defense. So we'll see if that, Miami kind of gravitates back towards their, perimeter stuff and timing up the pass game and kind of what we feel is more Miami. One other thing that's worth noting is just this matchup with Mike McDaniel and the Baltimore Ravens over the past few years. Dolphins have had a lot of success in this matchup, and they've had some of their bigger games. Some of those have come with, innovations out of the gate, stuff like that. But, they have surprised at times. So we'll see, 8-point game, 51 on the road. Tough to say with Lamar Jackson coming off such a long injury, what's going to happen there. So, I don't know. Nothing I'm trying to put much on going into the weekend, but we'll see. That'll be an interesting game, that's for sure. And see if Miami's got a little more life in them, but I do think the opponent sure helped last week. So moving on to the Sunday slate, you got Denver at Houston, and Houston is favored by 1.5 here in the total with 39.5. So right off the bat, if you're interested in playing spreads and totals, I think that teasing Denver up to 7.5 is a really strong play here, because I think that the Broncos are. I guess as I was going to say that, it's going to be a little bit more of an interesting question because, Denver's not going to have Pat Surtain in this game. These are two of the probably 3 to 5 best defenses in the league, right? That total of 39.5 makes a lot of sense to me. I think that, either side, you can just point out tons of talented players. And even without Pat Surtain out there, Denver's going to bring a lot to the table. They're going to bring a lot of heat against this Houston offensive line that had a better week against San Francisco last week. But, I would also say that, a sweeping takeaway, just kind of watching the Niners over these weeks is, they just have to play such a efficient style of football, which they can do to win right now. And they just don't have a lot of juice, right? They don't have the star players that they've had in the past. We'll talk about the Niners actually in the next game, but so don't, think that Houston still needs to prove it against, a front like Denver's that, they have guys who come from everywhere, right? Nick Bonito is a lead off the edge. I mean, Jonathan Cooper does a lot for them on the other side too. Like, I think that, he might get discounted a little bit. And then John Franklin Myers and Zach Allen are both capable of winning one-on-one inside. That's not even getting into some of the depth and rotation pieces that the Broncos have. And I mean, they've got such a deep, talented front. I think that we saw Houston have better success against some weaker defenses prior to that game against the Seahawks. That was such a debacle on offense. So now we'll see. It's going to get ramped back up, and we'll see how they handle everything there in Houston. But you'd hope that things are moving in the right direction. CJ Stroud looks so much better. So that was really nice to see. I'd prefer to see all these guys play well. It's a lot more fun to watch the film that way. That's for sure. So it's good to see him moving in the right direction. Them getting Jalen Noel more involved. That dude's got some juice to him for sure. I think they need to really lean into some of those guys, the more talented rookies. I don't know that I'm saying anything that anybody watching the tape isn't saying. So we'll see. It's such a work in progress that at least the O line, the rotation seems to have settled itself. You kind of see Juice Scruggs popping in and out for Laken Tomlinson, and them kind of splitting that left guard spot with Ingram solidified over on that right guard spot, and then Titus Howard, officially anchoring down the right tackle spot. So, I was iffy about really declaring that their group, but it does seem that group, that is going to be the group, and, it's going to help with the communication. You would sure hope, it's, and given the progress they showed last week, and just, the mindset that DeMeco Ryans is going to bring to the organization with improvement. And not that worked out for, I guess, the last offensive regime, but, hopefully they're moving in the right direction there. It's going to be a really good test for them. Flipping it around, for Denver, I thought Bo Nix had some really good throws in the last game. Still had some moments that you wish he was a little bit better. It's just a work in progress with Bo. And I would say that the players around him are playing really, really well right now. Get RJ Harvey involved, taking that one home on the crazy Quinn Monera's backside block, which if you haven't looked up that highlight, that's, block of the decade kind of thing. So, definitely worth your time. I mean, he climbs up, just demolishes the linebacker, takes out the safety, then turns around, gets another guy. So, great stuff from Quinn Monera's last week. That Denver line just continues to be good. Even with Ben Powers down, I'm going to butcher the guy's name, but Alex Pałkowski, number 63. I felt like he had some solid moments. I think he's playing just fine for them. And, it'll help to, Powers is a good player in his own right, but, at the same time, they're doing some good things there, and I think that you're just seeing that, Evan Ingram, I think, is getting more and more involved, doing some good things for them. Screen game's really strong. I guess that is one last night, while Bo had some good throws, there are some of these games where he's putting up these numbers and you're watching back the film and it's kind of screen out into the flat, popping for an explosive, stuff like that. There's just a lot of positive to Denver's offense, I guess. And again, Bo made some really good throws down the field, so it's not just that, but his skill players definitely pat him out a little bit. So as I say, I think this should be a close game. I'd be very surprised to see, barring the defense is getting a pick six or something like that. That really spreads it out. If these offenses were just to go back and forth and the game ends mostly in kicks and scores, so to speak, I think that it's going to be a really close matchup. So, jumping forward to the San Francisco Giant, not 49ers at the New York Giants. And so the Niners are 2.5-point favorites on the road in this game. 48.5 total in New York. So, I think it's a tough spot. I don't know how much I trust either of these teams. The Giants, it's just interesting to see. I think that Jackson Dart is just, there's development that needs to happen, right? It's just a lot of running stuff. What's bizarre though is just the end of the game there when Cam Scottaboo has already had this brutal injury. Seeing them just unleash Jackson Dart down at the goal line when they're losing by 3 scores, was it? It's just kind of I don't really understand what the objective is there. Is it to because I don't think that's helping him in his development, just running into people and getting taking more hits. Because right now the Giants have not won a lot of games. They weren't going to win that game, and I think that the focus should probably be more on working on plays and concepts that are going to be more reproducible and be winning football in the long term. And Jackson Dart's young right now, and he definitely can run, but that's not going to last forever, and he's not going to survive playing like this. So, I think that, it's just tough to be more than lukewarm about the Giants, I guess. The back end of the defense just continues to struggle. A lot of flashes on the front in the front, but that's only so much. On the flip side with San Francisco, I mean, there's just as I mentioned earlier, just a decided lack of juice with this team right now. Maybe when Brandon Ayuk gets back, if he is, kind of able to bring what he brings on the outside, I think that would really help this offense out. Brock Purdy, probably boost them up a little bit, but I don't know that, that's so much the problem when I watch the Niners offense is Mac Jones. I'd say it's, more just kind of the opportunities he has out there and kind of how much juice they have left in that offense right now. With Trent Williams, just not the silverback anymore at this point, and the O line's fine but not great, and it's just not an elite Niners team talent wise. So we'll see how it moves forward. I'd probably still stay away from it to some degree. Just I don't know what to expect from these teams. Honestly, I don't. I think the Giants are a little bit of an erratic team, and we'll see how they play without Cam Scottaboo. But he has clearly been kind of the heartbeat of the offense, I feel like, during this run. So I'm a little bit, just wonder what that'll look like without him. And, I would think that Kyle Shanahan will be able to scheme things open for his offense against this defensive backfield. But, it's just, I think there's a lot of questions. I would say, George Kittle seems like a, reasonable candidate to, continue to get a lot of work because, he's clearly the best threat in this offense outside of Christian McCaffrey as a pass catcher. So I don't feel like the Giants are have really anybody who worries you in the back end. So that seems solid, but don't have anything with a prop or anything too strong a thought there. Giants will be getting Tyrone Tracy back out there and probably get Devin Singletary into the mix some, but it's I don't know. Tracy's probably, obviously if you're playing fantasy, that's a great pickup if you're in season long, right? So nothing you need me to tell you that. Indianapolis at Pittsburgh. So we got the Colts favored by 3, heading in with a total of 50.5, and the Colts are on the road here. So I think you want to say 3 points is the same line that the Packers had against the Steelers in Pittsburgh last week. And, I would just say, anecdotally going into that game for the Packers, I think that the Colts are, the easier team to trust at this point in time. I think that they've just been really consistent week in and week out, and they, obviously had a couple games that could have gone either way. Both with the Broncos game and then the Rams game in the opposite direction. But I just feel like this offense shows up every week. It's so much rooted in the run game, and that just really travels. And Daniel Jones is just continuing to play really good ball. Not making mistakes, just getting it to the right players, and just continuing to crush it. So I think that you look at what Daniel Jones is doing, that's a huge positive. And I would be surprised if the Colts don't keep this rolling here, because the Steelers defense just, there's just, I think we saw with Tucker Kraft last week, it's suspect tackling. And, I think that this defense is just, got a lot of aging players, and that's just kind of the story at this point. And it's, hard to say how many weeks into the season we're going to go before we say that, I just don't know that this defense is what it had been. And, they were really strong out of the gate last season, and it tailed off, and it really hasn't picked up at all this year. And, I don't feel like any of their standout players are playing maybe to the dominant level that they've established in the past. And there's obviously a lot that goes into that. But I think that with the way they've struggled to tackle and what the Colts are going to bring to the table with Jonathan Taylor is a much more explosive back than what Green Bay was rolling out there. That's worrying to me. And then, Tyler Warren, really strong chance to have really big game as well. And, I think that could be true of anybody in the Colts offense. But, those two in particular are, with Jonathan Taylor and Tyler Warren, against any given opponent, you would say that they're threats to put up a lot of yards with the ball in their hands. And for Pittsburgh right now, it's just it's not looking good. And there are a lot of players on that defense that aren't suddenly about to get younger. So it'll be interesting to see the other side of the ball. I think it's maybe not the best the Colts, you worry about the back end of the defense, especially as Shavarius Ward continues to be out with this concussion, and the outside corner options are just just not the best. And besides that, I think that this defense has enough positives in it, but I think the key thing is Indy's defensive line is what's going to drive this. And DeForest Buckner is playing at an exceptionally high level this year. It's hard to say how much Buckner has ever dipped, and he's always been an elite player, or at the very least a red player right below that, and even on a down season. So at the same time, though, I think he's just crushing it right now, and I think that he really sets the tone for them. And then there's enough around him with what Latu will bring at times. What you got some stuff from Kwity Paye, Northwestern guy at Acampo, which I'm just butchering names left and right for the Colts here. I'm sorry, but yeah, Combine Warrior, he's had some production this year on the interior. So I think that it's one of those situations where the Steelers are just not going to be explosive on offense. They're going to, be this big team that's going to try to bully you and play efficient ball and play keep away, and not turn the ball over, which all is going to help out this struggling defense. It would be a lot better if the defense was complementing that and they could play that way. But we'll see. The one thing I would say is that Aaron Rodgers, I think, really nice games. Couple weeks in a row here, and he's definitely making some plays out there. So it's not every snap or anything like that, but I think that there's still some juice left in him. But at the same time, I think that the Colts to cover the 3 and win this game is a likely scenario. So I think that right to have a high scoring total, kind of a weird thing with the Pittsburgh Steelers given what they've been over the past few years. But yeah, I feel like they're more of an over team than anything at this point. And, the offense, as I say, they're not turning the ball over, and, they're moving it at times. So it's not, one of the league's best offenses by any measure, but, definitely not a slouch either. So I think that, probably reasonably fair with the whole pricing there. But, I expect the Colts to have another really, really good game, and would be surprised if they don't win this one. Flipping forward to Carolina at Green Bay with Carolina coming back to earth in a big way last week. And I think that, it really just comes down to the defense just lacks the talent across the board. And if they're playing against a good offense that, has a way to, can run the ball on them, because of those issues, or, has the depth to pick on some of the players that you can get after in coverage. I think that, it's just, a Carolina team that it just doesn't have enough talent on that side of the ball. And then, on offense, it's, it's good, but at times, but obviously we saw a huge drop off last week. It's been obviously something I've seen Dave Canales, the head coach, talking about, but Rico Dowdle is outperforming Chuba Hubbard, but they're splitting carries, and that's messing up the efficiency of the rush game compared to the 2-game stretch where Chuba Hubbard just went off. So you throw in the turnover in the red zone, I guess, or close to the red zone by Dalton, and it's just a rough day for them against the Buffalo Bills, to say the least. Now hopefully Bryce Young coming back helps out some, but now they're going against the Packers defense that's a lot better than that Bills defense. So I don't know how that's going to go. They need to get into a run heavy formula. They don't. I get, you want to be able to get after Green Bay because I think the cornerback position is as weak a spot as they have on this defense. I do think even with some of the down plays last week for Keyshawn Nixon on the outside, I think it's generally been a positive season for him, especially if you're considering his trajectory as a player and kind of the arc of how he's gotten to where he is. I think that there's still a lot of reason to think that he's going to be able to play solid ball at one spot for Green Bay. But it's just remains a question mark on the other side. If Corey Ballantyne can step up, get going, they really like using. Anyways, we'll see. But Carolina definitely has the horses to challenge kind of the depth of that. But if they don't get the run game going and they don't use play action, I think it's going to be tough for them to pass protect, particularly against Micah Parsons, obviously. But against a number of these guys from Green Bay, Carolina is not at full strength on the interior right now. I think Brady Christensen was did not participate, if I am not mistaken. Which is tough because he's starting for Robert Hunt right now. So we'll see. But yeah, you can definitely understand why Green Bay is favored by 13.5. We'll see if they can play more consistently on offense. We saw in the second half last week kind of the high end talent of that group, and I think at this point with Christian Watson and Matthew Golden in the offense to really provide vertical stretch, in addition to the physicality that Tucker Kraft's going to bring. There's a lot of reason to like the Packers, but it's been all over the place for them. So we'll see, but hopefully Carolina's offense is a little more fun to watch this week relative to that whole situation last week against the Bills. But hard to say with them at this point. With the Packers, think that they're going to keep humming, and hard to say who's going to really have huge games, just because Josh Jacobs is not like getting huge rushing performances. But then again, if you're gonna pick a defense to light up the scoreboard against, I think James Cook would probably say Carolina is a pretty good group to get going against. So yeah, I think that expectations make sense for that game. Minnesota, Detroit. How weird is this situation? Guy, Detroit favored by 8.5 and total of 48.5 or 48 here, depending on where you're shopping. Minnesota, it's just obviously a really disjointed situation with, hopefully JJ McCarthy is back and ready to start and everything like that here, but he has been out for a long time at this point. And, now Carson Wentz is not available, and it would appear that the drop off to the backup behind McCarthy is going to be really steep, even if McCarthy is not, if his numbers continue to be what they have been, I guess you could say, which would be the downside of it. And, I think there's a good chance that McCarthy, was able to use the time off to recalibrate a little bit and improve. But, same time, he was having a lot of downs in the early going. So even at the best case scenario where you get McCarthy out there, this Lions defense is doing some good things for sure. Especially getting Aleem McNeil back, Aiden Hutchinson signs that well-deserved huge contract extension. I think that there's, just a solid group this year, and I'll get Brian Branch back this week. I think that honestly, the 8.5 might be a little bit low, just depending on what your expectations of JJ McCarthy are. If you think that they might continue to struggle here, and it's just, really hasn't come together, I don't think, for the Vikings the way they really hoped, in the offseason with all these different pieces. Obviously, really rough game in this past one. And then, when you flip it around, the Lions are as, well-oiled machine as any in the NFL right now. And, I think that they are, probably well-equipped to, get after some, Minnesota's funkiness. I think that, Detroit should have the advantage on the offensive line. And, with the way Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery are playing, I don't know. Tough to pick against the Lions, and tough to think that they won't have another really productive day on offense the way they've been humming. So we'll see coming out of the bye here for the Lions. And with the Vikings, obviously some controversy around the building with the whole Carson Wentz situation, which obviously glad to see Wentz was able to dispel that. But it's definitely I think a franchise that you feel like is kind of this is a tough moment here, right? Like they moved on from Sam Darnold, who's playing great out in Seattle and is taking the Seahawks. Maybe we'll see how it all shakes out, but like they're in contention for the number 1 seed. And I think that's very much in the possibility set for Seattle with Sam Darnold at the helm. And, they're flailing in Minnesota, and it's looking like it's not going to be as successful a season. And then, all of a sudden we're into year 3 of JJ McCarthy's rookie contract. And, I think the more problematic thing about it is that, obviously there's still time with McCarthy and with that rookie deal to take advantage of that. But at the same time, I don't feel like, all these veteran additions that they signed as, later contract players have really made the impact you would hope for. I think if you compare their free agent class to New England's free agent class, like I would certainly, take the Patriots with Milton Williams, like really being worth the money, in my opinion. Like, you might as well go get an impact player if you're going to be spending a ton of money on a defensive tackle rather than, getting a smorgasbord of run stuffers that you could probably, find in later rounds. Like Milton Williams is a player that it's tough to find those guys. And Harold Landry, I think, is playing well for them. So I think that, plenty of time to change that narrative. But right now, yeah, I would have a hard time saying that, Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen and Ryan Kelly and Will Freeze have made kind of the hope for impact on this Vikings team. But, as I say, plenty of season left, and maybe JJ McCarthy comes out and stuns us here. But yeah, I would lean to the Lions for this one until we see it on the field. Got the Chargers heading into Tennessee. So they are 9.5 point favorites on the road with a total of 43.5. Yeah, it's tough to argue against that one here. Hopefully for the Chargers, Joe Alt just continues to get healthier. I thought he had, good game coming back with that ankle. I think that, probably had one rep where he got beat to the inside where I wondered, hey, whether that might have gone a little differently if he'd been fully healthy. But, Chargers able to get back on the right track last week. And I mean, and obviously with them playing that Thursday night game, they get the extra time to rest up on. I think that we'll see. It's really interesting to me, thinking about what this offense can kind of be with Orion Gadsden playing such a prominent role. I think I talked about that maybe going in. Yeah, can't quite remember, so I won't try to recall that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they shape this. They've just got so many weapons and so many different body types now. Like you talk about building a basketball team, I think that Chargers are for your group of pass catchers, right? You want versatile skill sets in terms of body type. Some bigs and some smaller, quicker guys, right? And I think that the Chargers are a really good example of a team that's built that way. I think that it's pretty interesting to watch the way that Trey Harris has his role in 13 personnel as the single wide receiver and kind of the things they do with him there. And hopefully Omarion Hampton is able to come back, at full strength from this ankle injury. Hassan Haskins Kamani Vidal is doing a really nice job filling in, I think. But at the same time, Hampton brings a different level of juice. So, if he gets back, that just amplifies this offense even more. So we'll see. I think that, good stretch for them to keep steadying the ship here, right? And Tennessee defense, that's just bad at this point. Traded Roger McCreary now. I also got rid of Jarvis Brownlee at cornerback earlier this season. Coach has already been fired. I think that this is just a tough situation for Tennessee, and obviously you saw another rough performance last time out. So yeah, I just don't have a lot of hope for Tennessee. They've got such a young cast on offense, and Cam Ward's if you're a Titans fan, the focus just has to be on enjoying Cam Ward down and just appreciate the good things he's doing out there because he's doing a lot of good things. Throws the ball, I think, pretty darn nicely, and we'll see. I think that who knows if either Ianamore or Chamari Deke, I like Ianamore or Chamari Deke, really turns into an upper level receiver, but in terms of mid-round draft picks that impact your team for a long time, the parallel I might draw is with Romeo Doubs and in Green Bay and kind of what he's been able to do. Not to do one-to-one comparisons with the players, but Doubs has been a productive part of that offense for most of his rookie contract, and I think that would certainly be a positive. So even if they don't get more than they're currently getting out of those two, I think you probably get that. So that I think they need to get a big time impact playmaker at the wide receiver position. I'll get into that or come the off season, but for the time being, just appreciate the good, and I mean the bad's going to come, and fortunately that's not his fate or anything like that, or the long-term future. Just got to keep working at it and keep improving, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, expect the Chargers to take care of business here. If you 9.5, I want to tease that all down because you're still at the 3.5. But yeah, that would be another note. If you were trying to tease some things, Detroit 8.5 down to 2.5 against Minnesota, that would be a nice one to pair with Denver up to 8, I guess. And then Chargers, Tennessee, kind of window passed on that one. It did open at 8.5, but yeah, I'd say just stay away from this one personally because Tennessee's just been such a tough team. So got the Falcons at the Patriots coming up next year. Patriots favored by 5.5. Total of 44.5, 45, and the Falcons. Obviously, part of the problem last week was Kirk Cousins and his play at quarterback, but Michael Penix, while he should be back this week, it wasn't exactly setting the world on fire of late, and he's just so inconsistent with his ball placement. And this New England defense is I think pretty tough to play against. With Christian Gonzalez back, and he's just elite corner at this point. And Carlton Davis playing that other side, and with Marcus Jones, who signed a contract extension this week in the slot. Like, they've just got guys who can cover you. The safeties are solid, not spectacular in the back end, but they're in position. They frequently make plays. And I think the defensive line in particular is just good. And they're mentioned some of the guys that they're getting a lot out of with Milton Williams, Harold Landry. I mean, Caleb Von Chasen continues to make plays. So, I think that this New England defense is really well equipped to, give this Atlanta offense problems again. And, I'd say Elijah Wilkinson, he's doing his best filling in there at right tackle, but there are times where you definitely feel that drop off from what you would be getting with not even the drop off, just the fact that Elijah Wilkinson is a swing tackle and he's ultimately a backup and he's having to start this whole season, and there's uneven play at times. And the rest of the line is, been, they have their games, right? And so we'll see. I think that New England has the advantage on both sides of the ball here. And, you flip it around, as I was saying, like Atlanta seems like the MO is that teams are going to want to run at them. So, I'll be surprised if New England doesn't roll out some of the pony package stuff with both Travion Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson. Emphasize Ramondre Stevenson in the downhill run game. Have Henderson available on some jet sweeps to change up the tempo a bit. And then you're going play action with Drake May, and the Patriots have such a deep cast of pass catchers that they're going to be able to get to the weaknesses on the Atlanta secondary, with the primary one being Mike Hughes on the backside of it. And as good as AJ Terrell is, and I continue to like what Xavier Watts shows, and then Jesse Bates is a good player, but like there are ways to get after the spots on this defense, and I think Josh McDaniels is going to have no problem doing that. So, I think that the Patriots are one of the best teams in the NFL right now. I mean, you throw out that result against the Raiders in a game where the rain affected things, and week one was crazy, right? Geno Smith sets the Raiders franchise record for passing yards, and hasn't exactly gone smooth since then. But Christian Gonzalez was not out there back then, so a lot of different factors. And I think that New England 5.5 might be a little bit low. I think that one maybe should be on the other side of the 7. So that'd be one that's interesting to me. I really like Stephon Diggs or and Kayshon Boutte, to either one of them to potentially have a big game. It's just kind of about who gets what matchup. But Boutte's having a really good season, just adjusting to the ball well at the catch point. He doesn't get the most separation, but like for what his game is, he's really figuring it out. And Drake May is just throwing the ball so dang accurately right now that he's able to maximize any receiver type right now, whether it's placing the ball really right on a guy like Kayshon, or it's letting some of his faster receivers like Pop Douglas go run under a ball. So this Patriots offense hits you in every way. Obviously Myles Garrett got after them in a big way, but that'll happen, right? And I thought overall that was a really good performance for New England's offense against a really competitive Cleveland defense last week. And I think that they'll continue to keep rolling against Atlanta here. I'd be very surprised if that doesn't happen. So Chicago Bears at the Cincinnati Bengals. So two teams coming off on some disappointing outcomes last week. What with the way that crazy game against the Jets ended for the Bengals. The fact that Joe Flacco now is missing practice time with apparently a sprained AC joint in his throwing shoulder, which is not great. And then you got the Chicago Bears, who, just tough game overall. And I think that if you've been watching the show, it's just kind of more what you expect from Caleb Williams. You wish it had been a little bit better of a game, and you could have cut a couple of those mistakes out and got him the win against a Baltimore team with some backups. But he's just he's progressing, and it's gonna hopefully keep coming. But it's some of the mistakes are tough. Obviously, that interception that he throws coming out of your own, you're still inside the 10 and you're throwing that interception. That's just, a really ugly one across the field. I thought that was really disappointing to see. Obviously I'm not, that's just, I don't know why I'm making that observation. You don't need to listen to this show to hear that. But let's just keep a broad perspective here, right? Let's not get too caught up in the week to week. Let's compare Caleb Williams' whole game last week to really any game from last year. And, I think there's just a lot of positives to still draw from it. So, It's like Bo Nix. It's like Jackson Dart. I mean, Drake May is an exception right now, and of course he can keep refining his game. But a lot of these guys are still building it up. So we'll see. Cincinnati's defense is truly dreadful. So if you're looking for a group to have a good game against, I think that this is the one, or one of them. There's several very bad defenses in the NFL right now, but Cincinnati just. I mean, they're all over the place, and seems like there's a lot of discontent as well. When you got Logan Wilson, who's supposed to be kind of the leader and centerpiece of the defense, asking for a trade and not playing a whole lot, and then you got the rookie who's playing next to Nate. Sorry, blanket on the name right at the moment. Let me pop up their depth chart so I can get that. I want number 40, but he's just so undersized, and it's. Just I can understand being frustrated with the way that, gosh, was it yeah, man, I'm trying to think who it was last. For the Jets it was Isaiah Davis running over this dude in the hole last week, and it's just that's just not good enough. So I can understand as a veteran player. Barrett Carter. Yeah, I mean, and I'm interested. I haven't looked this up, but yeah. He's listed at 6 foot and 231, which is undersized, but I wouldn't be surprised if that guy's 220 pounds. And, he certainly moves around and covers ground well, but this is a physical league right now. And, I just don't really think that, that's, he doesn't strike me as a player who's going to stick long-term in the league because he's just so small. And then, you add in, how bad Jordan Battle is closing in the run game. And it's just tough going for them. So, Caleb Williams, for as bad as last week was at times, good opportunity to rebound this week. Hopefully get the run game going, do some things to help him out. But yeah, I would, I don't have a heck of a lot of interest in this game. Chicago is apparently favored by 3 points on the road. I guess, part of that probably is Flacco's injury report status, because this did open as Chicago just 1.5 on the road. Totals at 51, I think, because both of these defenses are just so damn bad. But if Flacco is playing with a compromised shoulder, I don't know. I just stay away from this. It's just turning into kind of muck, right? It's if Chicago's not going to beat Baltimore, it's going to be tough for them to be competitive, catching up to Green Bay or Detroit. Even though, NFC North maybe not as deep as we'd hope for, but they're not doing themselves any favors. But we'll see if they can get one against Cincinnati. That gets them in the right direction. All right. Popping forward. So the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Las Vegas Raiders, and speaking of lines that, are just a little bit tough to understand. So Jacksonville's favored by 3 on the road here, and it's 44.5. So I guess that's fair, given how inconsistent Jacksonville has been. At the same time, I think that Jacksonville has had a lot of promising moments, and when their offensive line is not getting overwhelmed, the offense has, been able to run the ball with Etienne early in the season. They've been able to do some good things. I don't know what's going on with Brian Thomas precisely, but he still is, he's still an above average receiver. He's not nearly the player he was as a rookie, but, he's still, able to stretch the field. He's still able to thread in some areas. They got Travis Hunter. Well, at the very end of the game, I guess some of it, but they're trying to find more ways to get him involved. And, I think this was a team that really needed the bye week on offense. I think that they have been so sloppy all season, and it just really came to a head against these teams that just are overwhelming the offensive line. And, I think they play Houston 2 weeks from now, and that's going to be, another adventure. The last time these two teams played, both defensive lines were just crushing each other. And, it wouldn't surprise me if that happens again. But for the Raiders right now, they don't have those players. I mean, that defense is just, it's just very talent deficient at this point. I think that this is a really good matchup for Jacksonville if they're going to get going under Liam Cohen and have a strong second half of the season. And I think hit the ceiling of and there is, to me, a very clear ceiling for this Jacksonville offense. Again, I think that they're a little bit like Houston, maybe, where they're going to struggle if they're going up against a team that has a defensive line equipped to really take advantage of them, but that's not the Raiders. And the Raiders also don't really have much in the way of people to cover you either. As I say, kind of a talent deficient defense. And throw out that Max Crosby is, dealing with injuries now, as he's just kind of piling them up over these past few years here, which is obviously not great, given that the Raiders are probably not winning anything this year. And there's only so many years you'll be an impactful guy in the NFL, right? But obviously when Matt Max is out there, one of my favorite players to watch. So hope for the best there. But even if he is, Jacksonville has too many good players on offense, and I think that their line should be fine against most of the players on the Raiders front. So I think that they're going to have a really strong outing. And then you flip it around, and the Raiders have just been very disappointing on the offensive line. I haven't seen the injury report on Colton Miller yet. I can pull that up as I go here, but if he gets back, that helps obviously because he's quality player at left tackle. But at the same time, the rest of the group has just been rough this season. And, I think that, I don't even see Colton Miller on the injury report. So unless he was on IR, which I'm not positive about, but whatever. But in any case, I think that, even with Colton Miller out there, the Jaguars have a bunch of good players on this defensive line. I mean, good old boy in the middle, Devon Hamilton, just continues to be. He's such a massive human, and he's a run stuffer. He's not adding a lot in terms of pass rush, but he continues to be a presence for them. Josh Hines Allen is having an awesome season. Hopefully Trayvon Walker is back after having some time. Check that injury report as well. But even if he's not, I think that Jacksonville gets enough out of their front, and I think there's questions in the secondary. I'm also like, that Greg Newsome trade is just not looking so hot. We'll see how he does this week. But is Vegas really going to take advantage of that? I don't have any reason to think that Geno Smith's. I don't know. You could try to say the same things about the Raiders and new coaching staff, all those things. They get Brock Bowers back this week. They got the bye week after the Kansas City beatdown. But I don't see some ceiling that they're not quite hitting out there, right? I just see a bad offense, and I don't know that that's going to change over the short amount of time they've had. So yeah, I think that Jacksonville, even though the road trip, it makes it a little tougher. I could see a number on the other side of 3, like a 3.5 or something like that. So, that would be, if I wanted to bet this game, it would be that side on Jacksonville. And then, I think Travis Hunter, his overs on offense should be interesting. We'll see, what the plan is coming out of the bye week. I think that, halfway through the season, I don't see how you can be happy with the return on what Travis Hunter has provided, given that he's costing you 2 first-round picks. And, that said, I think that the talent is all there. And, talking return on investment, probably don't need to do that anymore, but just maximizing what you do have. I think that getting him more involved on the offense and focused on that exclusively, because it's really hard to be good at either wide receiver or corner in the NFL. And right now, I don't think that he's maxing out either. And, maybe just focus the rest of the season on wide receiver, getting this offense to be as good as it can be. I think that they've got, the guys on defense that they can work around not having him out there. I think Monteric Brown's having, a better year than what he's had in the past. So, and Travis Hunter is, for sure undersized on defense. He covers great, but, he's not a big guy. So, I think they got to figure out a way to get more out of him if they're really going to compete down the stretch, because, they just, there's too many other gaps. And, it's one of those things where, to be totally candid, I think that they would have been better off drafting, Will Campbell or Membu with that pick. And if they had a better left tackle right now and Walker Little wasn't playing, I think that would be the question. Would you have had a bigger impact by putting Will Campbell on the offense and, having him take over as the left tackle that have had a bigger impact on this team than adding Travis Hunter? I think the answer is unequivocally yes at this point in time. So we'll see. Again, Hunter's got so much talent. So there's a lot of ways you could use him, but it's just not happening right now. Saints at the Rams. Yeah, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this game. The Saints offense is just really tough to watch. Obviously Rattler was sort of, digressing. So, certainly not improving. things were going off. Yeah, I don't have a dictionary to verify that word, but anyways, it's just not going well. I think that one thing I'd want to talk about with the Saints real quick is just kind of a talent assessment on the younger parts of the roster. And obviously it is what it is with this organizational build and all the things. But I think that Trevor Penning, you're seeing more and more moments where my expectations were preposterously low for him with this move to guard after some of the holds. He hasn't been taking all those penalties, but you do just see a lot of deficiencies as a pass protector. Just with movement in general, he doesn't move his feet great. So I don't know that he's going to be part of the plans long term there in New Orleans. I do think that watching back on and focusing a little bit more on Kelvin Banks specifically this week, just having seen some of his metrics and stuff, and just that are not good, and just kind of trying to map that out with what I've observed. And I would say that for sure in this last game for the Saints, Kelvin Banks, there were a couple times where he got beat with some hand combat moves around the hoop and gave up some quick pressures, and that stood out a little bit. If I'm taking a much more holistic view of the player and looking at the long-term production, I think there were a lot of good things to point out. Like, there was a twist in particular. It wasn't the best executed twist in the world, but he did a nice job waiting, taking it. I think you see things like that, like awareness. He has good pass protection reps, kind of, in a lot of different scenarios. I think that he overall moves well. I think that he's, got good play size, all those things. I'd say that, like, contrasting him with Josh Connerly from Washington, where it's going to be more of a concern that he is consistently missing the block, the player he's trying to block. Just comes down to that. He moves well, and it seems like all the pieces should be there for a Josh Connerly, but it's just not translating to actually executing the block. Guys just slip him quite a bit. I think that he struggles with some inside pressure. So, fast forward to the next game, I just wanted to provide a contrast. With Banks, I would say it feels a little bit different, where it's not as consistent with some of that stuff, but at the same time, there are clear things to work on. So again, but this is offensive tackle is a long-term position in a lot of cases. You think back to the Andrew Thomas story, and I would say that while it hasn't been maybe what you want, he's not an out of the box all pro tackle, I would still say that there's a lot of positive things to draw from there. And, if you're, talking about his long-term development and what he could be in year 2, year 3, I think that there's enough positive out there to think that, this could, really come along here as time goes on. Whereas, like, there's, plenty of other guys that you're watching on a week-to-week basis where it's like, all right, I'm not sure this is ever gonna really work. I think this is probably a backup situation. And sometimes those guys surprise you. Arion Taylor, sure, he would be a guy that comes to mind, but there's other guys like Walker Little where, like, just from the beginning, it's kind of like the lack of play strength and the lack of quickness. Not lack of great size. It's like, I'm not really sure how you're going to be a starting tackle in the NFL if you don't really stand out for your size, your footwork, or just your, play strength. If you're not like the hugest guy in the world, I think that's going to be a little bit tough. So, I think that Banks does have some of those things. So we'll see. It'll be a work in progress. We'll keep an eye on him and check in as we go. They're 14-point underdogs to the Rams for a good reason. Rams have had the bye week to hopefully get Puka healthy. I'm not sure about the report on that, but I don't think it really matters. The Rams have enough weapons to light this team up, and Stafford's just having a phenomenal season. So I would roll with that. The Saints defense is just not there. You just got guys getting old there, and it's just team in transition, right? Both sides of the ball. So Tyler Shupp, didn't really have anything notable to say about him. Don't necessarily expect him to outperform Spencer Rattler. So jumping into other games. So Kansas City Chiefs at the Buffalo Bills. The Chiefs favored by 1.5 or 2. I think that, with Buffalo at home, teasing them up across the 8.5 is kind of, or to 7.5 or 8.5, depending on where you're at. If you want to play those teasers, that's kind of an obvious way to approach this. I think the line's, pretty high with 52, but, you don't really want to, Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. I'm not really trying to bet against them scoring a lot of points and putting on a show for everybody on Sunday afternoon. So, with the Bills, got back to the run game identity and obviously absolutely smashed the Panthers. I don't think they answered a ton of questions there. Probably a little bit of an overreaction to the losses going into the bye. I think that. A lot of, it's so interesting. Sometimes you hear these characterizations like, Atlanta, soundly beat Buffalo by 2 scores. Well, I remember Atlanta kicking a field goal late to make it a 2-score game after Buffalo had some chances to tie it on that drive, Penix almost threw a pick six the other way. That would have made it 17-17. So, I didn't feel like it was that controlled. Just, sometimes the outcomes aren't, it's not your day, and, I think that there's, a large extreme from like, you really played that bad down to down versus we didn't get a number of outcomes on the pivotal moments in the game. And then the score ended up reflecting it that way. So, that's kind of how I've been feeling about Buffalo throughout it. Similar to Kansas City with the start. Obviously, they were playing much better teams, but with the start they got off to. But yeah, this should be a hell of a game. Kansas City just keeps coming, right? I think that Rashee Rice just, continues to get more and more opportunities as a featured piece. We'll see kind of how things move along. It'd be great if they get Josh Simmons back on the field. Obviously, it seems like the organization is good with whatever he's dealing with it at home. But definitely a very talented player, and he's a lot of fun to watch. And I'm really hopeful that he's back out there. Speaking of him, great footwork, and then just incredible play strength for he's not a Joe Alt size tackle, right? But he is strong as all get out. And yeah, really enjoying watching that offensive line come along. Enjoying watching Patrick Mahomes operate right now. So yeah, a lot of positives for Kansas City. So get a big test against Buffalo here. We'll see how it goes. As I say, I think if you're playing that in any way, I'd probably I think it's a tough one to pick. Especially with Buffalo at home, but I'd probably give Kansas City the lean right now. I think that both offenses are dang good, and the Buffalo defense I think has a lot more question marks, especially with Ed Oliver out for the year with that biceps tear. But same time could tease Buffalo up as well. So, and then we got the Sunday night nightcap, and Seattle Seahawks going on the road against the Washington Commanders. So 3-point spread, 47.5 or 48, depending on what you're looking at. I don't know that I would have a strong stance on the spread either way. I would say that, to me, we've got the X factor of Jaden Daniels coming back in this game, right? And he won't have Terry McLaurin, who's now out with a re-aggravated quad injury. So it'll be kind of the group he was playing with before. Kind of mentioned, Connerly's issues on the offensive line. Last week I had Coleman out there instead of Laramie Tunzel, with Tunzel dealing with something. I think it's going to be a tough go because, Jaden Daniels, maybe he does feel great, but, he got a brace on his left knee and he pulled his right hamstring. He's had multiple lower body injuries at this point. That's not great. And his offensive line, actually his whole offense around him does not match up well against the Seattle defense. And I would say that that's the biggest story here. I think that Washington has a high ceiling on offense when they're right, and Seattle's playing to a pretty high ceiling on offense right now with Jackson Smith and Jigba having a fantastic year. Sam Darnold, taking his game to a new level right now, and really, really has, cut out those questionable decisions. And it's a much more controlled offense, much more, measured offense. I think with Clint Kubiak running things. My only big complaint about Clint Kubiak has been his decisions to get Jalen Milroe involved this season. Besides that, I think everything has looked really good for the Seattle group. So I think, two talented offenses, but then you flip this around to the defense, and Seattle's, one of those top 3 to 5 units in the league. And I think Washington's, been as bad as anybody in a lot of regards. They just, so bad in run defense at times. They just don't have a lot of oomph on this defensive line at all. Just tough to really point to the playmakers with this group. So, I think that disparity between the defense and offense, and the fact that Seattle's defense has shown they travel, that would be the biggest play, I think, in this game. So, I wouldn't be thrilled about rolling out Washington guys in fantasy. I'd be staying away from them altogether in DFS. I think that this Seattle defense, really interesting group, especially, Washington's in a desperate situation now. So, if they fall behind on them, they're probably going to keep hammering, and that could definitely lead to some mistakes if the game plays out that way. I definitely think the Seattle side is of interest. The line has moved from 3.5 to 3, so a little bit towards Washington, a little bit more value on Seattle, but I don't think these teams are very close right now. I think that Seattle is just really, really talented, and I definitely underestimated them coming into the season, and think they're pretty loaded. So, I think this could be a little bit of a blowout, even with Jaden Daniels out there. And, could Yeah, no question in my mind that what things could be leading with on Monday, November 3rd is what is going on with Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. This is the team that was supposed to take the next step, and they just got their ass kicked by the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday Night Football. So we'll see. Maybe that's the story. Maybe it's not, but that would not surprise me in the slightest. And then we will get that Monday night game, and we get Kyler Murray returning to his home state of Texas, where he won the high school state title in Jerry World. So yeah, Arizona Cardinals against the Dallas Cowboys. For the Cowboys, that game against the Broncos, obviously, very very disappointing go of it for them. I felt like there were a few things that maybe could have gone the other way. Pretty easily. One thing that I was thinking about watching Dallas right now is and I couldn't have imagined saying this going into the season, but it's those things where when there's enough for everybody to eat, it's all good. But like when they were kind of up against it against the Broncos last week, I kind of think George Pickens is their best receiver. I think George Pickens is playing as good as really pretty much anybody, right? Not named Jamar Chase right now. I mean, he's been so acrobatic along the sidelines. What he's done after the catch, adding that element to his game. And George Pickens is playing phenomenal football right now, and I love CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb's an elite receiver. I've been on him for years, and I never thought I'd be saying that, but yeah, I don't know. I think it presents a little bit of a conundrum because if Pickens is, playing the way he's playing, like, I don't know, in gotta have it situations or when you're behind, maybe funneling it to him is something for Dallas to think about. Now, they'll not be facing nearly as strong a defense as Denver, but Arizona definitely has their players and their moments. And I think when Will Johnson and Max Melton are both out there at outside corner, they're pretty salty on the outside. And, you throw Buda Baker into the mix, you throw in, what Josh Sweat is giving them up front. And I think that there's, they're not world beaters, but they're not terrible either. So, it's not the same, but we'll see how it goes for Arizona. Kyler Murray getting back, Dallas is as welcoming a defense as you're going to run into in terms of getting out there. I think Marvin Harrison continuing to just improve before the concussion. Hopefully he's back. He's had some time to recover from that, so hopefully they get him back in the fold, and we'll see how it all works out for Arizona here. But we got a total of 53.5 or 54, and spread at 2.5. I would probably stay away from this because I just don't know what we'll get out of Kyler coming back, but understand why the total is 54.5. If anything, maybe just play the over and ride the wave on Monday night, right? But I think, like all those players in fantasy, I think it's going to be a tough one to pick for that DFS slate for getting that combination right. Although, probably a bounce back week for the Cowboys run game. And that's an underrated story for this week would be, Cardinals old run game coordinator being in Dallas right now. And how much that's helped out Dallas's run game. So we'll see how it goes. It seems like at this point, Arizona and Dallas are, teams that aren't going to be making the playoffs this year. I would say that, although, it's worth saying that in the NFC, just kind of looking at it right now, you feel like there's 6 teams that are kind of clearly a cut above. I think that, most people would be able to, run through and see that in the NFL standings. And then I feel like in the AFC that there are kind of 8 that really stand out to me. Hang on, let me just make sure I get this right. I'd say New England, Buffalo, Baltimore potentially, Indianapolis, and then Denver, Los Angeles, and Kansas City. So that would be 7. And then, either Jacksonville or Houston lurking. I think that, all of those teams have had, pretty good moments at times this year. And I don't mean to throw shade at the Steelers right now, but I don't know. I don't think that they've shown the high end kind of output that, I think they'd definitely be 7th team in the NFC, but, I could see them slipping back to earth with the way that the defense is playing right now. At the end of the day, they have a point differential of 0 in Pittsburgh. So, with the exception of the Ravens, who obviously have unique circumstances, and then the Jags are currently -9 with some of the beatdowns they've had, but most of these teams have positive point differentials, so we'll see. Maybe I get egg on my face though with Rodgers and the Steelers, but then you flip it over to the NFC and it's kind of like the Eagles, and then the Packers, the Lions, the Bucks, And then, I'd say the Seahawks and the Rams. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's 6. And, San Francisco has been, as I say, just kind of average. The record's a little bit stronger. I mean, you know, and it's just been so turbulent for all these other teams. It's not that any of them, whether it's Dallas or Washington or the Giants, I mean, throwing the Bears, Vikings have had Vikings less so. Then certainly Carolina and Atlanta, all teams that have had their good moments. And then throwing Arizona, they've actually got a point differential of just -1, which is better than San Francisco's 5-3 with a -4 point differential, and Arizona is 2-5 with a -1 point differential. Like that's it's the NFL, but it's just pretty wild. And Carolina's got a -38 and they're 4-4, so it hasn't shaken out for Arizona at all this year. And it's going to be hard to climb out of a 2-5 hole, but who knows? As I say, there's got to be somebody who emerges to take that 7th playoff spot, and with the possibility, I think a strong possibility that San Francisco could fall off some down the stretch. Like the door is still open for a lot of those teams. I think. So we'll see. Arizona has to win this one, I think. But so we'll see though. NFL gets crazy sometimes. So I might be looking pretty stupid saying all that going into week 9. But yeah, we'll see. And yeah, that's what makes it fun, right? So yeah, I think that's it for today. Last note on that Arizona Dallas game. Yeah, I'd probably stay away from that one in terms of throwing it into teasers because with the point total just that high, things can just get out of hand. So I'd rather play with the other ones. So anyways, that's it for week 9, everybody. Thanks for tuning in as always. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the episode. And yeah, I'll be back next week for week 10 to run through the slate.